The world just received a message. It was not sent through diplomatic channels. It was not whispered in back rooms. It was declared openly. Iran has announced that in a single warehouse, it possesses 15,000 missiles and 45,000 drones. One warehouse. Let that sink in for a moment. This is not just a stockpile. This is a statement of intent. This is a warning. And most importantly, this is a complete recalibration of the strategic balance in the Middle East. But here is what you are not being told. This announcement is not about defense. It is about deterrence. It is about sending a clear signal to Washington, Tel Aviv, Riyadh, and every regional actor that has been planning, plotting, and preparing for the possibility of striking Iranian soil. Tehran is saying something very simple. If you come for us, we will unleash a storm you cannot survive. Let us step back and understand how we arrived at this moment. For decades, Iran has been under relentless pressure. Sanctions, assassinations, sabotage, cyber warfare, and the constant threat of military intervention. The United States withdrew from the nuclear deal. Israel has conducted strikes on Iranian assets across Syria, Iraq, and even inside Iran itself. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states have financed proxy conflicts aimed at weakening Tehran's influence. The strategy has been clear: isolate Iran, strangle its economy, undermine its military capabilities, force regime change or capitulation. But Iran did not collapse. It adapted, it learned, it evolved, and most crucially, it built a military infrastructure that does not rely on Western technology, does not depend on external suppliers, and cannot be easily destroyed by airstrikes. What you are witnessing now is the result of years of strategic planning under extreme pressure. This is not desperation. This is preparation. Now let us talk about what 15,000 missiles and 45,000 drones actually mean in military terms. This is not symbolic. This is operational firepower on a scale that changes the entire calculus of conflict in the region. To put this in perspective, during the Gulf War in 1991, Iraq launched approximately 88 Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia. That was enough to create strategic panic. Imagine what 15,000 precision-guided missiles could do. These are not crude, unguided rockets. Iran has developed ballistic missiles with ranges exceeding 2,000 kilometers. They can reach every major city in Israel, every American base in the Gulf, every strategic oil facility in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They have developed cruise missiles that fly low, avoid radar detection, and strike with devastating accuracy. And they have demonstrated this capability repeatedly. Look at the strikes on Saudi Aramco facilities in 2019. Look at the precision strike on the Ain al-Assad airbase in Iraq in 2020 after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Those were messages. Controlled demonstrations of capability. Now add 45,000 drones to that equation. These are not hobbyist devices. These are weaponized, unmanned systems, capable of carrying explosive payloads, conducting surveillance, overwhelming air defense systems, and operating in swarms. Drones are the great equalizer in modern warfare. They are cheap to produce, difficult to detect, and nearly impossible to defend against in large numbers. A single advanced air defense battery might cost hundreds of millions of dollars. A drone might cost a few thousand. You do the math. Iran can afford to lose 1,000 drones and still achieve its objective. Can Israel afford to intercept all of them? Can the United States? This is asymmetric warfare at its most sophisticated level. Iran has studied every conflict of the past 3 decades. It watched what happened in Iraq. It saw how Libya was destroyed. It learned from Syria. and it concluded one thing. The only way to survive is to make the cost of aggression so unbearably high that no rational actor will attempt it. But there is something deeper happening here. This announcement is not just about military hardware. It is about psychological warfare. It is about shifting the narrative. For years, the Western media has portrayed Iran as weak, isolated, on the verge of collapse. Every protest inside Iran is amplified as the beginning of regime change. Every economic difficulty is framed as proof that sanctions are working. Every technical setback is celebrated as evidence of Iranian incompetence. But now, Tehran has flipped the script. By revealing this stockpile, Iran is telling the world that it has not been sitting idle. While sanctions were imposed, it was building missiles. While assassinations were carried out, it was developing drones. While the West was celebrating its pressure campaign, Iran was preparing for war. And not just preparing defensively, preparing to strike back with overwhelming force. Think about the strategic implications for Israel. Israeli military doctrine has always relied on air superiority and preemptive strikes. The idea is simple. Detect a threat, destroy it before it becomes operational. Maintain dominance through technological superiority. That worked against Syria in 2007. It worked against Iraq in 1981. But it will not work against Iran. Not anymore. Because even if Israel launches a massive air campaign and destroys half of Iran's missile stockpile, that still leaves thousands of missiles ready to launch. And Iran does not need to win a prolonged war. It just needs to inflict enough damage to make the war politically unsustainable for Israel. Consider the economic dimension. Israel is a small country with a highly concentrated population and economy. A sustained missile barrage on Tel Aviv, Haifa, and key infrastructure could paralyze the nation within days. Insurance markets would collapse. Foreign investment would evaporate. The tech sector, which drives the Israeli economy, would relocate. This is not about destroying Israel militarily. It is about making the cost of conflict so catastrophic that it becomes strategically irrational. Now let us talk about the United States. Washington has spent the past 2 decades trying to contain Iran without committing to full-scale war. Why? Because American military planners understand something the public does not. A war with Iran would not be like Iraq or Afghanistan. It would be a regional catastrophe. Iran has the capability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil passes. It has proxy forces across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen that would activate simultaneously. It has cyber capabilities that could disrupt critical infrastructure across the Gulf. And now it has openly declared that it possesses the firepower to strike American bases, naval assets, and regional allies with precision and overwhelming volume. This is not a war the United States can win cleanly, and it is certainly not a war the American public has any appetite for. After 20 years of failed interventions in the Middle East, after trillions of dollars wasted and thousands of lives lost, there is zero political will for another major conflict. Iran knows this, and that is exactly why this announcement was made now. But here is the most important part. This is not just about Iran defending itself. This is about Iran asserting itself as a regional power that cannot be ignored, cannot be bypassed, and cannot be removed from the equation. For years, the United States and Israel have been trying to build a Middle East without Iran. The Abraham Accords, the normalization deals with Arab states, the efforts to integrate Israel into regional security frameworks, all of it was designed to isolate Tehran. But Iran is saying very clearly, there will be no Middle East order without us. Any arrangement that excludes us will be challenged. Any alliance formed against us will face consequences. This is geopolitical realism at its rawest. Power is not about who has the moral high ground. It is about who has the capability to impose costs. And Iran has just demonstrated that it has that capability in abundance. Now let us address the question everyone is asking. Is this announcement credible? Could Iran really have this many missiles and drones in a single warehouse? The answer is yes, absolutely. Iran has been mass-producing these systems for years. It has an indigenous defense industry that operates outside Western supply chains. It has underground facilities that are hardened against airstrikes. And most importantly, it has a strategic doctrine that prioritizes quantity and redundancy. Iran does not need every missile to be perfect. It needs enough of them to overwhelm any defense system. And here is the part that should worry every military planner in Washington and Tel Aviv. If Iran is willing to publicly disclose the existence of this stockpile, what else does it have that it is not disclosing? What other capabilities are hidden in tunnels, in mountains, in dispersed locations across the country? This announcement is likely just a fraction of Iran's total arsenal. It is a warning shot, a preview of what is possible. Let me explain why this revelation changes everything about regional military planning. When intelligence agencies assess threats, they work with estimates. They use satellite imagery, signals intelligence, defector reports, and complex modeling to approximate enemy capabilities. But uncertainty is always built into those calculations. Now Iran has removed that uncertainty. It has told the world exactly what it has in one location alone, and that forces every military in the region to completely revise their threat assessments upward. Consider what this means for air defense systems. Israel operates the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems. These are among the most advanced air defense networks in the world, but they have capacity limits. Iron Dome interceptors cost approximately $50,000 each. Even if we assume a perfect interception rate, which is unrealistic, defending against thousands of incoming missiles and drones would exhaust the entire stockpile of interceptors within hours. And then what? The defense collapses. The targets become exposed. The strategic equation shifts entirely. The same problem exists for American Patriot batteries deployed across the Gulf. They are effective against limited threats, but they were never designed to handle saturation attacks involving thousands of projectiles launched simultaneously from multiple directions. And that is precisely the scenario Iran is now threatening. This is not theoretical. This is the operational reality that military commanders are now confronting. Now let us examine the industrial capacity behind this announcement. To produce 15,000 missiles and 45,000 drones requires a mature, sophisticated defense industry. It requires supply chains for electronics, propulsion systems, guidance systems, and warheads. It requires testing facilities, quality control, and trained personnel. Iran has built all of this despite being under the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history. How? The answer lies in strategic adaptation and technological substitution. When Iran could not buy components from the West, it reverse engineered them. When it could not access advanced materials, it developed alternatives. When it faced restrictions on imports, it built domestic production lines. This was not easy. It took decades. But the result is a defense industrial base that is now largely self-sufficient, and that makes it nearly impossible to shut down through external pressure. There is also the network effect to consider. Iran has not built this capacity in isolation. It has shared technology and expertise with Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various militias in Iraq and Syria. These groups now possess their own drone and missile capabilities, which they have used effectively in recent conflicts. When you add their arsenals to Iran's stockpile, you are looking at a distributed, multi-layered threat that cannot be neutralized through a single military operation. This is strategic depth in its most effective form. Let us also talk about the timing of this announcement. Why now? Why reveal this information publicly when military doctrine typically emphasizes secrecy and surprise? The answer is that Iran is operating from a position of confidence. It believes that deterrence is more valuable than operational security at this moment. By making this information public, Iran is attempting to prevent a conflict rather than prepare for one. It is telling potential adversaries that the cost of aggression has become prohibitively high. But there is another layer to this timing. Regional dynamics are shifting rapidly. Normalization efforts between Israel and Arab states are progressing. Military cooperation agreements are being signed. Intelligence sharing is expanding. Iran sees these developments as a strategic encirclement, and it is responding by demonstrating that it has the means to disrupt any regional security architecture that excludes it or threatens its interests. This announcement is a form of strategic communication. It is Tehran's way of ensuring it remains relevant in any future regional settlement. Now consider the implications for energy markets. The global economy still runs on oil, and a significant portion of that oil flows through the Persian Gulf. If conflict erupts and Iran uses its missile and drone arsenal to target oil infrastructure across the region, we would see a price shock unlike anything in recent history. We are not talking about a temporary disruption. We are talking about sustained attacks on production facilities, refineries, export terminals, and shipping lanes. The economic consequences would be felt globally within days. Stock markets would crash. Inflation would spike. Energy-dependent economies would face severe crises. This is economic warfare potential on a massive scale, and it is another reason why rational actors should be working to de-escalate rather than provoke conflict. Because the costs would not be confined to the Middle East. They would ripple across the entire global economic system. There is also a nuclear dimension to consider. Iran's missile arsenal provides it with a delivery system. Right now, these missiles carry conventional warheads, but the infrastructure required to deliver a nuclear weapon is already in place. Iran has consistently stated that it does not seek nuclear weapons, but the capability to produce them, if the decision were ever made, is within reach. And the existence of a robust missile delivery system makes that capability even more strategically significant. This is why the breakdown of the nuclear deal was such a catastrophic failure of diplomacy. It removed constraints without removing incentives. Let us now examine the human and political cost of potential conflict. Wars in the Middle East are not clean, limited engagements. They are messy, protracted, and devastating. The civilian populations of Iran, Israel, and neighboring states would bear the brunt of any escalation. Thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands, could die. Entire cities could be damaged or destroyed. Refugee flows would destabilize surrounding regions. The humanitarian catastrophe would dwarf anything we have seen in recent conflicts. And for what? What would be gained? Even if one side achieved a tactical victory, the strategic environment would remain hostile. Grievances would deepen. Cycles of revenge would continue. The fundamental issues driving the conflict would remain unresolved. This is the tragedy of warfare in the modern era. The costs are immense, and the benefits are illusory. From a purely strategic standpoint, the rational response to Iran's announcement is not escalation. It is engagement. It is recognizing that Iran has legitimate security concerns, just as Israel and the Gulf states do. It is acknowledging that a sustainable regional order cannot be built on the exclusion or subjugation of any major power. It is accepting that diplomacy, however difficult and frustrating, is infinitely preferable to the alternative. But rationality does not always prevail in international relations. Pride, ideology, domestic political pressures, and historical grievances often drive decision-making more than cold strategic calculation. And that is what makes this moment so dangerous. We are in a situation where a miscalculation, a miscommunication, or a deliberate provocation could trigger a chain of events that no one can control. Iran's announcement is a test. It is testing whether the international community, particularly the United States, has learned anything from 2 decades of failed military interventions. It is testing whether Israel understands that military superiority does not guarantee security. It is testing whether regional powers are willing to accept a multipolar Middle East rather than continue pursuing fantasies of hegemonic dominance. The answer to these tests will determine whether we move toward stability or slide toward catastrophe. And right now, the signs are not encouraging. Rhetoric remains hostile. Military posturing continues. Diplomatic channels remain underutilized. The risk of conflict remains unacceptably high. So, what should be done? First, all parties need to recognize that the status quo is unsustainable. The current trajectory leads to war. Second, back-channel communications need to be established or strengthened to prevent miscalculation. Third, regional security arrangements need to be inclusive rather than exclusive. Fourth, economic incentives need to replace punitive sanctions as the primary tool of engagement. And fifth, the international community needs to facilitate dialogue rather than take sides. None of this is easy. None of this will happen quickly. But the alternative is a regional war that serves no one's interests and destroys everything it touches. Iran has just shown the world what it is capable of. The question now is whether the world is capable of responding wisely.